The Senate's Pandemic Federal Telework Act would put federal employees on maximum telework status until the Department of Health and Human Services declares the public health emergency from the pandemic is over. Whether that happens or not, agencies are rethinking what their footprints look like. Angela Stiles is partner at Akin Gump. She's a member of the Public Buildings Reform Board. Angela, welcome back. Thanks for coming on the program again. There's a lot going on in this look of and the feel of the real estate footprint because of the pandemic. What should agencies be thinking about now? And what do you think, as an enterprise, the federal government should be thinking about now?
Well, speaking as just one board member here, in many ways, this is an opportunity to look very differently at federal real estate. And what I think we've found most interesting is that the real estate that we identified in our high value round a lot of times isn't used as office buildings, right? What we're selling will be housing. It can be housing for homeless. It can be multi-use facilities as opposed to just office buildings. And so I think the government needs to alter the way that it looks at this completely. This isn't about disposing. It's all called property disposal. It's not about disposing of property. It's determining what's the best value for the federal government and what the best value for the local communities and what works for our federal workforce as well.
That tracks with what private sector organizations are thinking about too. That tracks with what companies that own big portfolios of shopping malls that are not really popular anymore, highly utilized. They're thinking about using spaces like that for warehouses, all different kinds of uses for all different kinds of properties. How should the government in particular, but how does one in general think about what fits best in a particular community for a particular piece of property?
Well, it's working with the local communities. It's talking to the members of Congress. It's talking to the local communities. And I will tell you that our federal government is just not good at that. What we have discovered as an independent board is that the government does not really understand the private sector. They're a little scared of working with local governments. They're scared of taking risks. And we're not going to get anywhere with looking at this differently until federal employees feel comfortable that this is their job and taking some risks. Like you see, like the Department of Defense, the Defense Innovation Unit, Army Futures understand that they need to take risks in order to act more like the private sector to do the best job possible for our warfighters. We need to take the same approach in the civilian agencies. What can we do best for our local communities and our federal workers?
So the military parallel, then, let me pull on that for a moment. I wonder if it makes sense to go back and look at the base realignment and closure efforts where the Defense Department did a fair amount of that. They did work with the local jurisdictions about what would make the most sense for a particular piece of property that the Defense Department was vacating. Are there lessons to be learned there, Angela?
There are so many lessons to be learned from that. And the problem is that our board we just make recommendations on the properties and what should be done with them, but it's actually GSA and their disposal, back to the word disposal again, folks that are in charge of kind of pushing it forward from there. And those are the people that really have to take a different approach to this and look at how it was done and be willing to think outside the box and use private sector practices and understand, just like you said, what the private sector is doing now with COVID in terms of how they assess real estate and how it's used.
So separate your board role from just your government experience. How much influence should what the inside of the building looks like, the workspace that the employees come back to, influence the overall footprint of what the government decides it needs to have 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Because on the one hand, I imagine nobody's going to really probably be comfortable coming back to an open office environment. On the other hand, square footage might be important if we decide we need to have a certain amount of space between employees.
That's right. But at the end of the day, we have so much square footage. And there's some excellent people at GSA and leasing as well that have really learned private sector leasing practices. And so between the combination of what we have in terms of our real estate and what we're able to lease, I think you can really come up with excellent solutions, maybe even lead beyond what the private sector does in terms of making sure that you have a safe, comfortable working environment when people do have to physically be there.
Should agencies start to think about what the inside of the space looks like, Angela, or is that premature based on not knowing exactly what people will want and what, from a safety perspective, will be necessary?
I think they have to look. I'm not sure that this is ever going away. I think we've obviously learned a lot about, the transmission of diseases. And I think for the long term, it'll be something else, right? And so we need to have work environments where we're comfortable. So it's time to start thinking now.
We just have a couple of minutes left. I want to shift gears. You're tracking some issues regarding small businesses that are trying to do business with the government. What's on your radar screen there right now, Angela?
Well, I think it's really interesting. We had the Kingdomware Supreme Court decision in 2016, and a lot of those Department of Veterans Affairs contracts are now, coming up for resolicitation. And I am a little bit troubled by how some companies have repurposed themselves as service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses in order to be able to qualify for this. Well, I think they're meeting the legal requirements. I'm really concerned that they're not meeting the policy requirements, and we're not serving our service-disabled veterans through this program in the way that we really intended to.
We have a little bit less than a minute left, Angela. For years and years and years, companies have met the letter of the law and not necessarily the spirit of the law regarding set-asides. Is what you're seeing now different than that?
No, from my perspective, I think it's worse because we're talking about service-disabled veterans that are kind of being hired as service-disabled rent-a-veterans, if you will, to run these companies as opposed to being true entrepreneurs that, benefit from the profits of the company. And it's probably not different, but I think worse in some ways because it's service-disabled veterans and we need to do our best for them.
20 seconds. Who can do something about that and what should they do, Angela?
The Department of Veterans Affairs. I think they need to take a hard look at the program and the policies and work with Congress on making sure that we get this right for them.
Angela Stiles, thanks very much. Great to have you back.
Thank you.